welcome to the Officially Denied podcast. I'm Peter.
I'm Toby. So we've been kind of on a bit of a break. We took a bit of a break last weekend, and we're back on. And there's been quite a lot of news, particularly in the last 24 hours. Bear in mind, we're recording this on Saturday evening, Saturday the 17th. I don't know, what any comments you'd like to make, Peter, on past few weeks of news?
Well, I think it's just worth to go straight into talking about the shooting in Parkland, Florida, since that's the main event, I guess, of the past few days. I don't think there's really the need to provide much context here, as I assume everyone would have already heard about it. The short series of events being that a 19-year-old teenager went into his former school from which he was expelled with an AR-15 and gunned down 17 people, including some teachers and his former classmates. And the aftermath of the shooting has been exactly what we've come to expect from these things. The complete outcry from the liberal side of America, who have immediately started calling for gun control measures to be implemented in the wake of this tragedy. And of course the complete opposite on the other side, saying that we shouldn't rush to conclusions, saying that we shouldn't politicize this, and that essentially that the whole gun control debate is irrelevant to the topic because it wouldn't have prevented it anyway.
As you're saying, both sides have their own opinion and views on what's going on, and frankly, I side almost completely with the liberal American viewpoint on gun control and school shootings in general, because it's the most sensible when you compare it to everywhere else in the world. If we're to take what both sides say, keep in mind that the right-wing conservative Americans that say we don't need to politicize the situation are saying it because, I'm going to go ahead and say this, it's not a crazy assumption, because the shooter is white. Because the shooter's white, they instantly say, no, it's a mental issue, well, guns aren't the problem,
I think that,
and so on.
I mean, because this happens so often, I think we've already established a very clear pattern of the kind of responses we can expect from both sides, right? Although, to be fair to the liberal side of America, their reaction to most of these shootings is to call for gun control. When you look at the right wing in America, they do have quite a few different responses, I guess, programmed for, you're right, in many cases, what exact ethnicity the shooter is. If he's Latino, it's often to call for tougher border control measures. If he was, say, Muslim, then I guess it's also to...
immigration ban.
Yeah, travel ban to tighten the borders, etc. If the shooter was black, then it becomes about better policing. And if the shooter is white, as was the case here, and as is, by the way, I should remind you, the case with most mass shootings that happen in America, then the typical response is to say that this is a lone wolf attack, it's to do with mental health, and obviously not to do with the gun. Why we should allow, of course, people with serious mental illnesses to purchase semi-automatic assault weapons is, I think, a relevant question to ask in that regard. But no, you are right. There is a very distinct set response, I think, that has developed, depending on the background of the shooter.
Which is unfortunate, and it is just a clear sign of the institutionalized racism that is present in the United States.
Well, and it's also, that, not to say that that's not a factor, but, ultimately it's, I think, to do with how best can the GOP deflect from the gun control issue, which is, I should remind everyone that this is not gun control is not a partisan issue as far as most American voters are concerned. I think somewhere between 80 and 90% of the American public are in favor of stricter gun control measures. So obviously that's...
It's just a vocal minority.
Well, it's a vocal minority, which encompasses primarily gun enthusiasts and apparently Republican politicians. So, I mean, like, it is a partisan issue only if you talk about kind of the Washington or state government level. And I think the problem for the Democrats is that most of the public doesn't actually recognize it that way. When a lot of people, I think, in America think about why there hasn't been any comprehensive reform on this issue, they think it's a Washington problem. Just because, partly because, this isn't a thing that's only recently happened under Trump. The Obama administration tried and failed to pass gun control many times. But no, like, we should be, I think, very clear in saying that on a political level, this is a Republican issue. The last time that gun control came up in the Senate, only 4 Republicans voted in favor of it, and only 4 Democrats voted against it. Meanwhile, if you take if you rank members of both the House and Senate by how much donations they receive from the NRA, the National Rifle Association, aka basically the gun lobby in America, which allegedly represents gun users, but really represents gun manufacturers.
Yeah.
If you rank those politicians by how much money they receive from the NRA, you have to, I think, get to like 41, number 41 or 42 before you get to the first Democrat. So on the kind of the Washington level, it is entirely a Republican problem. But the problem, for Democrats is that I don't think that viewpoint is quite well shared across America.
Yeah, you're quite right there. It's very much a Republican issue that is fully fueled by the gun industry in the country. But moving on to people's reactions and the outcry that we get at in this scenario, what I can help but notice was on Twitter, for example. I love Twitter. I think it's a great platform for immediate communication, for getting viable news sources if you're actually following a viable source, of course. And it's even a lot of fun when it comes to all these viral tweets that go around every couple of days. There are different memes and different kind of enjoyable aspects. However, whenever there's a situation like this, you get the shit show of American political Twitter that honestly is very depressing to read through. So I do try to pull myself away from it, but I did delve into it. And the main 2 talking points, which I agree with, one being from the right-wing American viewpoint and the other one being from the liberal viewpoint, are mental health, firstly, and secondly, gun control. So when it comes to an issue of mental health, as you said earlier, the right-wing American voters and supporters call for mental health issues being the root of the problem when it's a white shooter. But I personally would believe that despite most of the shooters being white, is a general case. There is a certain psychological aspect to it. The fact that guns are so readily available is scary, and there is a natural human reaction that leads to a lust for revenge. Sometimes if somebody does wrong onto you, you would like to extract revenge some way or another. Of course, in countries like Europe, it does happen. It does happen. I'm sure you've had it happen to you. But of course, a kid's reaction in the UK, say a kid in an English school is being bullied, and he just has this anger that would like to extract revenge on his bully, he'll probably just punch the guy in the face. And that, whether you believe it's right or wrong, is much more preferable than grabbing an AR-15 and gunning down people at your school.
Yeah, well, on the subject of, mental health being the root cause of these shootings, the unfortunate thing is that, look, is it a mental health issue? Well, in many cases, yes, especially when it comes to school shootings. Like, when we're talking about school shootings in particular, and not mass shootings in general, mental health is a giant issue, because we're dealing with, vulnerable young people who are sometimes going through a very rough time. The particular individual in Florida, has, in the year leading up to, well, what happened on Wednesday of this week, he ended up losing both his parents, including his mum, who apparently was the only individual he was actually close to. He was on medication for a while, but and he attended a mental health clinic nearby and then stopped going. So yeah, like, mental health is, of course, a giant contributing factor, especially when we're talking about school shootings. The problem is that when Republican politicians raise it as an issue with regards to gun violence, it is always a deflection tactic and not a prelude to actually getting any kind of solution to the issue legislated, right?
Oh,
like,
of course.
This is a party which brings up mental health every single time one of these things happen, and then quietly starts cutting funding for mental health services all across the country.
Exactly.
It is just a political weapon that they employ, again, to distract from the gun issue. And and it would be a shame if liberals in America ignored that aspect of the debate, because it is a serious subject. America especially has an insanely bad record globally with regards to mental health issues. It is the world's largest, for instance, consumer per capita of antidepressants. But we have to look at this issue both from the perspective of gun control and from the perspective of mental health or mental illness when it's relevant. And the two issues do interlink all the time. Again, I should emphasize that whether, like, if we're talking about whether people with serious mental illnesses should be able to purchase firearms, that is both a gun control topic and a mental health topic. And this month, last year, Donald Trump reversed an Obama-era regulation which existed to prevent people with serious mental illnesses from purchasing firearms. So there is a very, very... after Donald Trump received $30 million from the NRA, I should add.
Coincidental.
Right, yeah. So this guy in Florida, there's a very good case to be made that this guy might not even be able to buy a gun were it not for a political decision taken by Donald Trump this time last year, which allowed this individual, who isn't old enough yet to buy a can of beer, but is perfectly capable of apparently owning an assault weapon. So it is both a mental health issue. It is both a gun control issue. It is both of these things,
course.
and the legislative solution should be to do with both of these things.
Of course, and I don't want to delve into the whole gun control issue fully, because that would take us all night. But it's fair to say that there is no reason for anybody to need a firearm, because despite whatever the Second Amendment may say, personally, I just don't see any reason to need a firearm. Hell, just look at the rest of the world.
Well, look, I mean, we are two Europeans at the end of the day talking about a distinctively American problem.
Of course.
I think that should be pointed out. When it comes to guns in America, it is, despite what you might hear from a lot of gun advocates who say it's a self-defense thing or it's protecting yourself against the government thing or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a cultural thing. It's just a lot of people in America just like guns, and there's a gun culture, and people think guns are cool, and that's why people own so many guns. They don't just keep one for self-defense; they have entire basements full of them.
It's an obsession.
Yeah, sure.
But something else I'd like to add on, talking about gun control and mental health issues going hand in hand. Last night, I had a conversation with my friend JK, who is a psychology student and is most likely going to go into criminal psychology. And he was saying how, going on Twitter, he noted that some news sources were stating 17-year-old orphan shoots up school in Florida. And there were people replying saying, oh, the fact that he was an orphan has nothing to do with it. You're just putting all orphans in a bad light. And JK was reading these tweets and saying, well, no, you're dismissing factors that play into it. We had a conversation about this. I'm currently reading the book Mindhunter, which is the source material for the Netflix show Mindhunter. And the show's great, but the book really explains a lot about criminal psychology and what leads to serial killers in particular. But it does carry over to school shooters in this case. And, for example, one of the things that John Douglas, the writer of the book, notes is that the distinct lack of a maternal figure in a young man's life / the overabundance of an abusive maternal figure, both extremes, are hugely detrimental to their development. So if we take this case, for example, and by the way, may I excuse myself and say this is fully armchair psychology. I'm not going to make any wild assumptions and say that this is what's happening.
Sure.
I'm just, of course, putting it on the table and saying, hey, this is something that could be happening, as JK said as well. And yes, this young man did lose, as you explained earlier, his parents in the last year or so. And of course, that did have a huge psychological impact on him and pushed him over the edge. So the point that Jake was trying to make was we need to take into account all factors when it comes to school shooters or mass shooters in general, because yes, there is a mental health issue. Yes, there's a gun control issue, but there's also a case-by-case issue.
Sure, and I think it's worth adding, by the way, that when we look at the issue of gun violence in America, it is often very unhelpful to look at it through the lens of school shootings, not school shootings, mass shootings in general, because the vast majority of gun deaths that happen in America are not from mass shootings; they are from homicides. Actually, that's if we ignore all the gun deaths that happen from suicide. So about 33,000 people are killed with firearms in the US each year. About 11,000 of those annually are suicides, and the vast majority of the remaining ones are homicides, obviously unrelated to mass shootings. I think that is something to keep in perspective when talking about this, because, especially for those that don't live in America, this might seem like most gun violence happens, whenever one of these mass shootings occurs, but this is an issue that goes on day to day, all the time, everywhere. Just to throw one little statistic out there, when the shooting in Las Vegas occurred last year, about almost the same number of people that were killed in Vegas were killed all across America with firearms on that very single day. And this goes on day on day, all the time. And, we remember all the mass shootings that happen. We remember Vegas, we remember Orlando, we remember Columbine, we will remember Parkland. But we don't remember all the people who are killed every day all across America, because absolutely no one hears anything about it. Chances are, if there's less than 10 people killed in a shooting event, it doesn't make it past local news.
No.
And yet this happens all the time. If something like this happened almost anywhere in Europe, I suppose, it would be all over the media conversation, especially, by the way, if the shooter was Muslim or black. But yeah, so again, I think just looking at it through the lens of school shootings is somewhat unhelpful.
Of course. And one more thing I'd like to add about the whole debate between both sides, liberal and conservative, I'm pretty sure you've seen this, Peter, is the really bizarre Australia argument that some people make.
Right, go on.
Which people start putting out figures and start saying, look, I'm from the UK and we don't have shootings, whether it's on an individual basis or on a mass scale, however you'd like to define it, because we don't have gun laws like you do over there. Citizens don't have weapons here. And then I've seen a lot of right-wing gun nuts pull the fact that Australia would have the same number of mass shootings as the United States if it had the same population, which, quite frankly, it is absurd as it does sound.
It's mathematically wrong to
It's
suggest
mathematically
that,
wrong.
right? There hasn't been a single mass shooting in Australia since they introduced a compulsory gun buyback program after a mass shooting, I believe, in 1996, although I may be wrong in that.
96, 97, yeah, I can't remember exactly.
Right.
But
well, look, I mean, although I also think that, while that is to bring up countries where, there has been problems with mass shootings or gun crime in general and guns getting banned and that no longer being an issue, I think, that is a valid argument to bring up, just to illustrate, I guess, the problem that America has. Although I don't think it's very helpful when looking at generally the kind of solutions that may be available in America. Because at the end of the day, guns are not going to be banned in the United States. Like, I want to make this really clear that there is about a 0.0001 chance that guns are going to be banned in the United States. Not only is it a much more culturally ingrained thing in America than it ever was in Australia, but, well, politically, it is practically impossible. You would have to overturn the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In order to do that, you would need 2/3 of Congress, 2/3 of the Senate, and I believe 3/4 of state legislatures, at a time when most state legislatures are controlled by the Republican Party. That is, so, like, guns are not going to be banned in America. That is just not going to happen. But when we look at the practical solutions that we can turn to, there is stuff we can do. Again, very simple stuff, like, if you are someone with a history of mental illness, how about you should not be able to purchase a firearm, like this guy was? Or perhaps if you happen to be on a terrorist watch list, or if you happen to be on a no-fly list, you should maybe also not be allowed to purchase a firearm, like you are currently able to do. In America, you are able to buy a gun even if you are not allowed to board a plane. And again, this is something that has happened before, of someone buying firearms while being on a no-fly list and then committing a mass shooting. Another solution that has been brought up by many people is, of course, compulsory background checks if someone has a history of domestic violence. Because again, I should point out, the vast majority of gun violence in the U.S. is homicides, and a huge proportion of those are domestic related. It's stuff that happens within a single household, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, introducing compulsory background checks to make sure that people with a history of domestic violence or just with a generally violent history cannot purchase firearms is another solution. And at the end of the day, I think this is something that the Democrats should really get better at trying to draw a very clear dividing line. And if you are someone in America who deeply cares about gun control, as you should, then the most practical thing you could do is to vote for Democrats. Because, again, I would like to emphasize that this is, at a political level, a Republican problem. So, speaking of American politics, as I think you alerted me mere hours ago, Mitt Romney has finally announced that he is going to be running for Senate this year in the state of Utah, which this has been rumored for a while, of Mitt Romney's political comeback, shall we say. Of course, the Republican presidential candidate in 2012 who lost to Obama, and then who is most recently become known as a strong, Republican anti-Trump voice. So, Toby, what are your general thoughts on Mitt Romney re-entering politics and running for Senate?
Well, firstly, before I go on, thank you to Jacob/Jake Dunn for messaging us about this and notifying us about this news. It happened very recently. And my thoughts on it is currently the American political situation, as we spoke in the first episode of the podcast when we were talking about Oprah and opposition within politics, it's a really strange situation because once you hit rock bottom, the only way is up, right? And look, Romney was never great. I never really agreed with him on most aspects of his political agenda. However, nowadays, when he's voiced himself as someone very anti-Trump, the fact that he's a Republican and also has said that he really wants to make a change when it comes to, of course, mass shootings, I fully support his return. He may not be the hero we deserve, but it's the hero we need in this time, I guess.
Well, I mean, I would amend that slightly. He is definitely not the hero we need. I think this is more of a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And when you look at the Senate race in Utah, which is where Romney is preparing to run, just to provide some context for people who aren't very familiar with American political geography, the state of Utah is deep, deep red. Democrats just don't win there on a Senate level. This is a state that Hillary Clinton, of course, lost, and which Obama lost, and which Kerry lost, and which Gore lost. This is not a place that votes for Democrats. So the chances of a Democrat actually winning the Utah Senate election in November is almost zero, I would like to think. Obviously, it would be better for a Democrat to be in the Senate representing Utah instead of Mitt Romney. I think we can both agree on that. But if the choice is between Mitt Romney and a more, thoroughly, I don't want to say a far right, because really,
no.
When you're talking about the U.S. Republican Party, it's more, the far right wing of the far right party anyway. But obviously, I'll take the lesser of two evils when it comes to this particular case.
Exactly.
Given that Democrats just don't have a chance in Utah. And now that Romney has announced that he will win, now that Romney has announced that he will run, I think there is, I would, just to chuck a number out of my ass, I'd say that there is at least a 90% chance of him winning the Republican primary there and then winning the general election. The vast majority of polling that has been done in Utah with regards to the upcoming Republican primary has Romney as a very, very clear favorite. Also, it should be made clear that the fact that Romney is a strong critic of Trump will almost certainly not affect his chances in the Republican primary in Utah, because Utah is not actually a state that likes Trump. During the primaries there in 2016 for the presidential nomination, Donald Trump actually came in third, behind Ted Cruz and John Kasich. So if a kind of a pro-Trump candidate decides to challenge Romney, I don't think that will be the end of him in any way.
Not at all.
So Romney, now that he's decided he's going to run for Senate in Utah, I think it's almost certainly that he will win that Senate seat. I think the more important question is, what exactly does he want to do with it? Is this a way to set himself up for yet another presidential run a few years down the line? I don't know. Does he simply just want to get back into politics because he's bored? That might very well be it.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It's, as we've said, lesser of two evils, and it's an interesting situation that despite being a deep red state, it's not a Trump state.
And by the way, the reason for that, and Utah is very unique in this case, this is not something that we see in really any other kind of safe Republican state, is the fact that Utah is the epicenter of Mormonism in America. About, I think, 60% of its population are Mormons, and Mitt Romney is, of course, the nation's most famous Mormon. That is why he has such strong ties to Utah, and why he has chosen Utah as the place he's going to try to make his comeback. So, one more recent political development that has occurred, this time on this side of the Atlantic. Henry Bolton, the UKIP now ex-leader, has been voted out by his members at a general meeting where I believe just over 1,000 members cast a physical ballot, which he lost comfortably. Obviously, the ballot being a no-confidence motion in Henry Bolton, who we have covered before, which means that UKIP will now have to hold Yet another leadership election within 90 days.
And as we said, the funds for this, it's not going to be a cheap process, and UKIP are struggling
Yeah,
in the financial side of things.
even though their membership has steadily declined since the Brexit referendum, it still, I think, stands at somewhere around 30,000. And to mail ballots to 30,000 people and then have them delivered and counted is not a cheap process.
No.
And UKIP's financial situation is famously abysmal right now.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that it's the beginning of the end.
Well, I think the beginning of the end
Began a long time ago.
began when they won the Brexit vote.
Yeah.
I think the question now is how exactly the end will come about. Of course, save for some totally unforeseen circumstances in which Theresa May decides to cancel Brexit, which of course will not happen, and if she does that, she'll just be removed as leader of a party, and Brexit won't be cancelled, so that's not even, I think, worth bringing up. But yeah, I mean, look, there's two ways this can happen. A quick and painless death, or a slow and painful death. The first being that the party just decides to disband, which I don't think will happen, because there's still too many people who want to try to build something for themselves inside of it. So what I genuinely think will happen with UKIP is they'll just continue their long decline into political irrelevance. By the time of the next election, they'll probably stand even fewer candidates than they did last time. Any sort of person within it, any sort of personality with even any sort of name recognition will leave, probably, and it will, I guess, slowly go the way of the BNP. It will, anyone with even remotely moderate views will jump ship as soon as this whole thing starts going downhill. And they will probably just be taken over by its extremist wing, which almost happened in the last leadership contest anyway.
Yeah. That's a pretty predictable outcome.
I mean, I've mentioned this before on the last time we discussed UKIP on this podcast, although it didn't actually make into the final cut because we went massively over time. But the one bit of political advice I will give to UKIP members, all 30,000 of them, is that if they genuinely want to do the most they can to ensure a hard Brexit, then I think the most sensible option for them would be to just go and join the Conservative Party, whose membership stands at around 70,000 right now, and 30,000 UKIP members, I think, would be more than enough to make sure that they have a hard Brexiteer prime minister after Theresa May resigns. But as far as UKIP itself is concerned, then yeah, I think the party is over.
Yep, it is indeed. Instead of going for an entertainment section this week, we decided that it's time for a horror story. So, Peter, I've told you about this already. I said you
have had a run-in with some Russian hackers, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'll start from the beginning and I'll work my way through it. So, on the 15th of February, Thursday, at 9:23 p.m., so middle of the afternoon, I received an email from, so the name and surname are in Russian, and the @gmail.com is a username which I won't share, I won't disclose. And he wrote, the subject line was, "Your Origin ACC."
For anyone who's not aware, Origin is a popular digital distribution service for PC gaming.
Exactly, and I really hate fragmentation of services, but I'm a fan of the game Battlefield and the whole series, and to play Battlefield I need Origin, so that's the reason why I have an Origin account. So the body of this email read, "Hello dude, I found your Origin ACC and you mail in the internet. Do you need that? Question mark. I send you it if you answer me there." So I had no idea what to do. I read the email and I thought, well, spam. Put it in the spam folder. and I mentioned it to my mate, Adrià, who's my mate from Spain, and we were talking about this, and he said, Let's reply to this guy. Let's mess with him. It didn't go through the spam filter, so it obviously isn't a bot. I obviously haven't been put on this guy's messaging list if he had one. So I'll reply. So I thought, I'm going to reply in broken grammar. So at 2 a.m., so it was already quite a while after I received the first message, I said, hello, friend, where did you find it? I lost it and was trying to find it. Please send it me. Thanks, bro. So I just fuck with this guy. And he replied with my username, which is my email address, and my password. Right there on the screen. So I completely freaked the fuck out. I mean, that password, so I'll call it password A, is one of many passwords I now have, but it was my only password for everything 5 years ago. So this account, because I created it ages ago, had that password, and stupidly enough, didn't have two-factor authentication. I didn't go through that. So I'll go back to that in the end. So I thought, I'm going to talk to this guy, and I said, hi, out of curiosity, how did you come across this? I'd given up the game. I was like, I'm not going to speak in stupid grammar. I really need to know. And he said, I'm buying it for a $0.2. I'm playing BF1 a bit, and I've added Dead Space to your library. And I went onto my transactions, and this guy, for no money whatsoever, he just redeemed a code, added a game to my library. And I said, hi, firstly, thank you for notifying me of the issue, and secondly, could you please log out? And he said, oh, sorry, I'm logging out soon. I'm not in my home. I write to you when I'm logged out. And then a couple of hours later, no, not even a couple of hours later, so half an hour later, he replied, dude, I'm logged out now. And I said, thank you so much. Honestly, you've been so kind. I mean, that was the only account that I'd had affected. And his reply, which was strange to read many hours later, so when he woke up, I suppose, was, this world is not so bad.
I mean, I guess he was just feeling kind of nice that day, and didn't feel the need to change all your account details.
Well, no, going through it, I thought, let's do some cyber stalking, and I grabbed his name from his @gmail.com, so x@gmail.com. I searched for X on Google, and his Instagram appeared, and his Facebook. And when I checked his Instagram, his profile was public. It's actually an art page, in a way, like he draws. And he was just a regular Russian bloke in his 20s, and he had a post from 2 days ago of his computer running Battlefield 1. So this guy actually had this social media, and he actually reached out to me, which then made me realize what probably happened was the following. So there has most likely been a data leak or a hack into the servers of EA, the company behind Origin, and the usernames and passwords of their users, their clients, are all available. And what people can do, they can go into the dark web, and for about, say, $5, they can buy about 100, 200 usernames and passwords in plain text, or just in a Word document. Because he said 2 cents, and he had the photo of Battlefield 1 on his Instagram. I assume this guy went, I want to play Battlefield. I don't want to pay full price for the game. I'll go on the dark web, buy an account that owns this game, and play it through there. And I suppose he regretted the decision or got concerned about the source of what he got and notified me about it. But yeah, it was just really bizarre. The whole wholesome end to the conversation was pleasantly surprising, and just the whole conversation we had was surreal, honestly.
I mean, that is probably the most polite Russian hacker story I have definitely ever heard.
Yeah, he did not call me Sukabliet at any moment, so that's a win right there. But
I mean, but I think, the wider point being is that the fact that someone was just able to buy your account for $0.2 on
exactly.
some black web Russian hacking site is genuinely
concerning.
terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah, and so my point that I cannot stress enough, I really cannot stress enough, honestly, is enable two-factor authentication on every single service you can. And by every single service, I mean most services allow you to do this. For those of you not aware what two-factor authentication is, I'll give the example of Instagram, for example. Instagram now asks you to link a phone number to your account. And when you log in with your password, and it accepts the password because it's the correct password, it then sends you a text with a code that will only be valid for about 2-3 minutes, depends how long the service has configured it for. And you input that code and log in. So to log into your account, not only do you need your password, but you need your phone with your SIM card with your number. But then again, that's not entirely foolproof. Unfortunately, there have been interceptions of two-factor authentication methods. So I also recommend using a password management service like LastPass, for example. That's one I've started using now. It takes a long time to set up because you need to go through your accounts, you need to change the password for everything. It's a pain in the arse, I know. But what you do is you sign up with an email address and a master password, which I recommend be unique and one that you know for LastPass. And then every time you want to make an account for something or change your password, LastPass will suggest a randomly generated password, alphanumerical or with symbols if you need that. And you then input that and LastPass saves it. You can access it from all your devices. So not only do you have two-factor authentication, but you have a unique password for each service that will then not be valid for any other of your accounts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all brilliant advice. And personally, after you've actually told me about this, I did have to go and check that I have two-step verification enabled on everything that I moderately care about. And
scary shit.
Yeah, but yeah, I think I think we often kind of take it for granted the fact that we have ownership of everything that we have online, and that's not remotely the case. So, as it turns out, so if you don't want all your details stolen by some guy in Yekaterinburg or something, that might be something you want to look into.
So, on that note, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Officially Denied. You can find us on Instagram at Officially Denied, on Facebook as Officially Denied, Politics and Current Affairs, and on the blog officiallydenied.com, where we have not only our podcast posted, but we have articles posted by Peter, soon enough by me, and most recently, my friend Mohsin made a post about the encryption laws and the Snoopers Charter here in the UK, which we talked about in the previous episode. So thank you for listening. Goodbye.